Welcome to Inside Santa Cruz. My name is Joyce Anderson, and our show today is about the Santa Cruz River Street Walking Bridge, and it is going to be named the Chinatown Bridge. We're going to be talking to a lot of amazing, talented people who have contributed to the naming of this bridge. But first, we are now in the end of summer in 2020, and you are going, and with a worldwide pandemic of the COVID-19. So during the shooting of this event, you will see us wearing masks and social distancing as we will, and also we're filming outside. All right, and now I would like to introduce our first two guests, George Au Jr., businessman and philanthropist, and Greg Pepping, Executive Director of the Coastal Watershed Council. So welcome and thank you.
Hi, I'm George Au Jr. We are just about at my grandmother's house where it used to stand in old Chinatown in Santa Cruz, and we're very close to the San Lorenzo River. And our speaker here today next to me is Greg Pepping, and he's the reason we have this Chinatown Bridge name, and we are going to have the Chinatown Bridge monument with the dragon on top. And Greg, how did we get here?
Thanks, George. The San Lorenzo is Santa Cruz's main drinking water source. It's home to threatened and endangered species and a lot of other fish and wildlife. And the river is a place for a lot of people who live and work near the river to recreate. I truly believe that the Chinese residents who inhabited Santa Cruz's Chinatown right here somehow gave me the idea to name this project the Chinatown Bridge. That's how this started. I believe that. I know it. And then I reached out to George. He's a generous supporter because he loves the river, and the conversation went from there. The Chinese gate and the water dragon are elements from other members of the team, but that's the role that I played in the beginning. This river is also a key part of our history. This river is why Santa Cruz formed as a community in the first place. The community is built on unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking Yupi tribe. There is deep, rich history here. The Chinatown Bridge project is going to beautify the Santa Cruz Riverwalk, which is the city park that surrounds the lower river. It's going to educate Santa Cruzans about the history of the river and of Chinatown, the Chinese inhabitants who lived here and the discrimination that they faced, the contributions that they made. I continue to learn from Santa Cruzans, whether they were born and raised here or they're transplants, that people never learned or they've forgotten this important chapter of Santa Cruz's history. And learning or relearning that local knowledge is really valuable to people. The Coastal Watershed Council is a nonprofit, and we work throughout Santa Cruz County. We bring elementary and middle school kids to the river on field trips and do science classroom presentations. We bring volunteers to the river to test water quality, to learn science skills, pull invasive weeds and plant native species. And we do that as an investment in river ecosystem, also to help people build a connection to one another and to nature right here at the river. And the river will play a role in our future as well. People are more and more drawn to downtown and drawn to city parks. Downtown is changing, and climate and ocean changes will continue to affect the river and Santa Cruz. The reason that the Coastal Watershed Council is working with volunteers, youth, and families, we're working on science education, water quality, and habitat, and helping people connect to the river, is because we've learned that Santa Cruz's vision is of a fun, healthy, welcoming San Lorenzo River that attracts and connects our diverse communities to one another and to nature. As special as this project is, it's a very big part of that huge vision.
This is where I played and lived with my grandmother, my grandparents, and my parents in Chinatown in the 1940s. My father came over in 1926 when the Palomar Hotel was being built. He was 6 years old and he saw that happening. He went back to China in 1930 and came back in 1937 when the Second World War started in China. He felt that even when he couldn't become a citizen and couldn't vote and couldn't own land, this was still the land of opportunity. That was his attitude. And then when things did change and he could become a citizen and vote and own land, he was ready. And he was really a good role model for me. I was born the year that Chinese exclusion, 1943, ended. So how lucky was I? Luckier than my dad, or as lucky as my dad? What I tell people in my family is, I was so lucky, but now I'm old. I'm 77. And so I tell them, everybody that came after me, that was born after 43, you are lucky too. So you have to take advantage of all the opportunities that the people before us didn't have. In about 1943, one of the old men, Chin Lai, what he says to my father is, you are so lucky. Because at that time, my dad was 23. He was either going into the service or was in the service. And at that point, all kinds of people, women, black people, Chinese people, besides white men, were getting good, well-paying jobs in the defense plants. So he said that to my dad, you have all the opportunities. You get to go in the Army. He says you get to go in the Army, okay? And you can advance and do anything. And so what he was really saying too was, because if you look at the pictures, he was old. His time had come and gone. And so he was wistful when he said that. I love that story. Now, I wasn't there for that story, but my dad told me that story. And because he felt always lucky, but especially lucky, and the guy, Chin Lai, saw that. And to me, that's a story of, you got to always appreciate the opportunities that you have, and recognize that other people may not have been born at the right time to have those opportunities. So what I feel is that any of those old guys could have been me or more. That's what I say about the old guys. I'm on their shoulders. Well, we've had a lot of fun here. Now I'm going over to the Chinatown Bridge to see what Tom Ralston and Kathleen Crocetti are doing. I want to welcome Tom Ralston and Kathleen Crocetti to my Chinatown. This is where I grew up, spent the first 5 or 6 years of my life. I look at the San Lorenzo River and I feel the spirits of my family and the Chinese pioneers all around me. I've been working with Tom and Kathleen on this Chinese gate monument, and I'm so happy. Tom Ralston is a master cement artisan and artist. He wrote the book on fancy cement, and we get the benefit of 3 generations of experience and knowledge. Tom and I have worked on a previous Chinese gate over at Evergreen Cemetery, and we had so much fun with that we decided to do one here. Kathleen Crocetti is an amazing person who's beautified this area, my area where I grew up. Within a 1-mile radius of walking here, and I do this many times a week, I can pass hundreds of Kathleen Crocetti mosaic marble tiles. And they just make me feel happy because they're so beautiful, so in tune with nature, and I know that they are the creation of Kathleen and her students at Mission Hill. And I say, what a great thing this is for me to be seeing. Kathleen is going to do the dragon, which is going to be out of this world, that flies on top of Tom's gate. Tom, can you give us a few words about yourself and how you happen to be here today working on this gate?
Thank you, George. Yes, I'm a 4th generation Santa Cruzan and a 3rd generation concrete contractor. When I started surfing in 1963, I became instantly hooked, and my father told me he wasn't going to have any beach bum in his house, and I was going to have to come to work with him. And I just loathed it. In 1989, coincidentally, Joel Herzl asked my father if he wanted to do George Au's restoration of his Victorian. My father wasn't doing the concrete. He said, would you like to do that? And I said, well, okay. And when I got to do this job, which is probably the most decorative job I ever had, I was just taken by it. It became such a passion to do. his house, and I became hooked on decorative concrete, where you could take a drabby gray product and that was malleable and turn it into something that was really beautiful. George had asked me in 2016 to do the Evergreen Cemetery Memorial. And so he asked if I could meet with Kathleen and Greg Pepping and himself here. And I was late, but as I was walking up this ramp, I got a burst of inspiration that kind of showed me what this monument was going to be. It was kind of similar to what we had done before, but different. And when I asked them to listen to my idea, I was bursting with joy because I knew this is it. And when I said, you know, I kind of see a dragon on top, and Kathleen was, oh, I love that idea. And so she didn't know what she was getting into, though, when she got bombarded with emails about what exactly a Chinese dragon represents and how you should build it. But this project is very special to me. My great-grandmother came from Italy in 1900 and worked in this Chinatown from 1900 to 1902. And George always talks about ghosts and spirits, and I believe I have those running through me too, and my grandmother is probably one of them. So this project has been, it's not just me at all. In fact, it's mostly the people like Kathleen Crosetti, Sean Monahan of the Bronze Works. It's Michael Cochran, who's doing the specialty woodwork, and Tony Armour with the solar lighting. These people are making this very special and over the top. And the last thing I did was say, I need this more yellow, more yellow, more yellow. And when I told my designer in Springfield, Illinois, he said, you know, Tom, you're pushing the envelope with this color. You can't get much more pigment in a yard of concrete. And I said, please, Joe, just a little bit more. And so he got this, and I couldn't be happier because this yellow and Kathleen's dragon and the red lettering that Sean's gonna do is going to just pop, and it's gonna be mwah, magnifique. Thank you.
George knew about me because of my work on the river. So there's 118 mosaics on the Water Street Bridge done by students from Mission Hill Middle School, and they represent the endangered species of the watershed. And so that's how George knew about me. He'd seen me 1 year at a time sprinkle the beautiful corridor of the San Lorenzo River with artwork. I knew Greg Pepping because all of the works that my students do are related to the river and its ecosystems. So the Coastal Watershed Commission has been really helpful in coming into my classroom and teaching my students about things like the microinvertebrates, which are the little tiny insects that feed the fish and get the whole food cycle and the chain of life going here on the river. Tom, with his enthusiasm, was just expressing the ideas that we already had. So I pulled out my sketchbook, and Tom and I went off, and it was a beautiful thing. So very, very exciting. I've done cement, three-dimensional forms in the past and covered within the mosaics, but this dragon is definitely the largest. We as a team had a community day at the Museum of Art and History where anyone who was interested in giving their input on what we were up to was invited to come and have this experience with us. And it was beautiful because there was a show at the mall at the time about Chinese ancestors. So George gave a tour of that show, and then we all sat in a room together and talked about what this should look like. Fortunately, I met some professionals who can tell me about the significance of numbers and shapes and curls and clouds, and so our dragon has some features that are really important to the Chinese culture. To better acclimate myself, I of course did a whole bunch of research and ended up buying a little bronze dragon head from China, which is the inspiration for the dragon that I eventually carved. So the dragon started out as a drawing, and then he was a metal armature, and a metal armature is like the skeleton. So after he had the skeleton or the armature finished, I carefully carved foam blocks, and I fit those foam blocks to the armature, and then like shaping a surfboard, I started shaping the square edges off the foam to make the dragon. So then once the dragon had his shape, I covered him with fiberglass and then with some beautiful cement mix, and we had to let him sit for 3 weeks, and now we are currently covering him with mosaic tiles. But we are certainly very excited. Looking forward to seeing him sparkling up there on top of the arch.
Thank you so much for being part of this project. You guys are the major artists in this dream team that we have, and I can tell you that the spirits of my family ancestors and the Chinese pioneers, the spirits of the Chinese pioneers, are so happy that we have your world-class work going to be part of this. Okay, everybody, we're deeper into Chinatown, where I grew up as a kid. We're very close to my grandmother's house, and I'm here with my two great friends, Jeffrey Dunn and Sandy Leiden. They are the premier historians of this region. And without these people, the Chinese pictures wouldn't be around. There wouldn't be a story about the Chinese in Santa Cruz. They gave me pride in being Chinese here, and I'm so appreciative because by them doing this, by changing the image of the Chinese, they made my whole life different. If it weren't for them, the books that they've done, Chinese Gold, Chinatown Dreams, Santa Cruz is in the Heart 1 and 2, there wouldn't be any knowledge about the different Chinatowns that were here, and Santa Cruz wouldn't have a rich history. Jeffrey, how did you get involved in all of this with these characters? How do we happen to be here talking about this Chinatown Bridge monument?
Thank you, George. Quite frankly, my family lived in Chinatown. It's a myth that there were only Chinese living in Chinatown. My family operated a business in Chinatown, ironically, with George's aunt's father. So there were familial connections going back generations as well. So it was my great uncle who first told me about Chinatown and first caught my interest in Chinese American history and really all of Santa Cruz history, because it's not separated when you tell history. It's all brought together. And on the Santa Cruz waterfront, there were all of these characters, many of whom had lingering remnants to Santa Cruz's Chinatown. Now, ironically, I was born in 1955, the year of the Great Flood that really marked an end forever of this Chinatown. So I didn't live ever with Chinatown being existent except when I was a very small kid. But I lived with it as part of the myth, as part of the history, as part of my familial lore in my heart, and I heard these stories. And as I got older and lived in Santa Cruz, people had no concept that there was a Chinese history here, except for one particular person, my dear friend Sandy Leiden. And George talked about him being the eminent professor of history at Cabrillo College. I was one of his students as well. And so sort of unburying Santa Cruz history, literally and metaphorically, has been one of my lifelong passions. I started uncovering old articles about this Chinatown and Santa Cruz's other Chinatowns, which were scattered on the margins of Santa Cruz, and dating back to prior to the Civil War, dating back to the gold rush. And I began reading it, and then when you read about it, you have to kind of figure out how it all fits, and there's a narrative. And Chinatown becomes a metaphor. It becomes a metaphor for the other, something mysterious, something forbidden, a place where only a few can enter, all right? So Chinatown has this sort of mysterious quality to it. And it had that for me as a kid learning about it here. Because all of the things about Chinatown that are part of that myth took place right here. And quite honestly, my family was involved in those activities, okay? And then there's the real life of Chinatown, the real people, the families, the human beings who lived here, made their lives here and died here. Real flesh and blood. George's mother and father, George's grandparents, both sides of George's family, maternal and paternal, lived here in Chinatown. They were real human beings with real lives. So while I'm still fascinated by the myth, Chinatown is Chinatown. There's that great line in the film at the end of Chinatown where someone says to the Nicholson character Jake Gittes, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown." Well, that's the myth. Well, let's not forget it, because Chinatown is also the real place. And if you go back and look at the people who lived here, real lives, and how they contributed to our history, you get a sense of this broader history. When you trace those lives back, all of Santa Cruz springs up from it. And they are everywhere in our community's history. In fishing, in mercantile trade, in transportation, in service, you name it, they are involved, and they played a role in developing it. Outside of the city of Santa Cruz, they develop agriculture. They are a central component of our lives, and they've been forgotten. It's a powerful story, and my own family was marginalized here. So I have the force of that in my blood, in my memory, knowing never to accept that marginalization, to fight against it wherever it happens. It's linked to Black Lives Matter, okay? Chinese lives matter, the Japanese lives matter. All the people who lived here and made this a home, and who made California and Santa Cruz what it is, their lives matter. And in history, they're often just written out of that history. And one of the things we've done passionately is to make sure that all lives matter here, and that Black lives matter, Chinese lives matter, that we don't forget those important histories.
I'd like to think of this troika that we have, this triumvirate here, that these three of us, is that George grew up here in Chinatown. Jeffrey grew up in town. He's a local boy. I'm the outsider in the sense that I grew up in Hollister, but came to this subject sideways. And I've often likened it to when I was a kid. There was a thing that if you dug a hole, right? If you dug it deep enough, you came out in China. That's what they always said. They said, well, if you just dig this deep enough, you'll come out in China. Well, historically, it's true, as I discovered, that every time you probed, you'd hit a strata, particularly in the history of California, of the Chinese, that there were Chinese stories and Chinese contributions and Chinese things in every place. And there was also the virus of racism in every place against the Chinese. So in a way, I kind of started out in a way focusing on, in some ways, the wrong thing. That is, focusing on the racists and the racism and the negative stories before I began to realize that that's not the story. They're the mirror. They're a mirror. They're not it. What you need to do is focus on the people themselves. And I began to do that, probed around and did a lot of research. And I got a chance, a pivotal moment in my career, actually, and a pivotal moment in this story. I was interviewing George Al Sr., George's father. And it just went from there. George immediately said, we got to do this. We got to make this available to the wider community, and that's what we've done. And we got a plaque over here on a wall that was put up in the 80s, one of the first recognitions of the local Chinese story. So the spirits are moving us. It's the spirits of the Chinese pioneers who were here. Chinese believe that if your spirit is not taken care of, if your family doesn't embrace your spirit and tend it and feed it and maintain it, that it becomes a hungry ghost. And hungry ghosts are bad news. I think what we have become and what we've helped Santa Cruz become is the extended family of the Chinese pioneers that were here, and in a very practical way, forget the thing that it's morally correct, but in a very practical way, we're appeasing the hungry ghosts who are literally everywhere, in the mountains, on the seashore. The spirits saw, now it's time. This is the moment.
Thank you, guys. I want to tell you what this Chinese Gate Dragon Monument means to me. This is like burning 10,000 sticks of incense every day to my family's spirits and the spirits of the Chinese pioneers. I hope that it changes the world and makes Santa Cruz a better community for everyone. That's what this Chinese Dragon Monument means to me.
Welcome. It is now summer of 2021. We're here under the arch and the dragon of the Chinatown Bridge. If you look behind me on River Street, you will see Trader Joe's and the parking lot, and on the other side all the way through the Galleria where Chinatown used to be. To learn more about Chinatown, you can get this book, Chinatown Dreams, and also Chinatown Gold at Bookshop Santa Cruz. I want to acknowledge that the photos that we used in this book for Chinatown Dreams and also in our video were all taken by George Lee, a photographer who lived here in Santa Cruz and in Chinatown. I want to thank our local historians, Jeffrey Dunn, Sandy Leiden, Morton Marcus, Tony Hill, and George Owl Jr., to name a few of so many that have helped us remember the past and the dreams of others who lived in Santa Cruz, Chinatown. Because of COVID this year, we are not going to plan a celebration or a dedication until 2022. I especially want to thank Community Television of Santa Cruz County, and also thank you for watching Inside Santa Cruz. Until next time, bye now.